My name is Sienna. I am 33 years old, serving as a logistics officer in the United States Army, and until last week, I believed I had a perfectly normal marriage. I had just seen my in-laws off at the airport, watching them wheel their expensive luggage toward the departure gates with warm hugs and promises to call. I was driving back to my military base to prepare for a grueling 6-month deployment. Then my phone rang. It was Maria, our housekeeper of 10 years, and her voice was shaking so badly I could barely understand her. She told me not to go home and to check my security cameras immediately. I pulled over to the side of the highway, opened the smart home application on my phone, and my heart stopped. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please like and subscribe if you have ever faced family members who underestimated your worth and tried to destroy everything you built. Growing up, I was taught that discipline and loyalty were the foundations of a good life. I applied those principles to my military career and to my marriage with Marcus. Marcus was a corporate consultant, always dressed in tailored suits, charming and seamlessly moving through high society circles. His parents, Ruby and Elias, were prominent figures in their local church community. They projected an image of absolute moral superiority and wealth. They never fully accepted me. To them, a woman in combat boots who dealt with supply chains and tactical logistics lacked the refined elegance they desired for their eldest son. They constantly compared me to Cassidy, the wife of Julian. Julian was the younger brother of Marcus. Cassidy came from generational wealth, a white woman from an old money family who always played the fragile victim to get exactly what she wanted. Ruby and Elias adored Cassidy, treating her like royalty while viewing my military service as an embarrassment they had to tolerate. That morning was supposed to be bittersweet. I had meticulously packed my gear for my upcoming deployment. Marcus had kissed my forehead, telling me how much he would miss me and how proud he was of my service. Since he claimed he had urgent client meetings, I volunteered to drive Ruby and Elias to the airport for their supposed luxury vacation to the Bahamas. They complained about my driving and my vehicle the entire way, but I simply smiled and nodded, playing the role of the dutiful daughter. I watched them walk through the terminal doors, feeling a slight sense of relief that I would not have to deal with their cruel remarks for the next 6 months. I got back into my car, merged onto the interstate, and focused on the mission ahead. I was 30 minutes away from the base when Maria called me. Her frantic phone call shattered the quiet of my morning commute. "Miss Sienna, you cannot go back there," Maria whispered into the receiver, her breath catching in her throat. "They fired me this morning right after you left. They told me to pack my things and get out. Please just open the camera feed for the living room." I pulled onto the gravel shoulder of the highway, my military training kicking in to suppress the immediate spike of anxiety. I opened the application on my tablet. The live feed loaded, buffering for a second before the high-definition footage appeared. My living room was not empty. Ruby and Elias were not on a plane to the Bahamas. They were sitting comfortably on my custom leather sofa, sipping champagne from my crystal glasses. Standing near the center of the room was Marcus. Beside him was Cassidy. And resting on the coffee table was my personal steel safe, the one that held my trust fund documents and my classified deployment files. I watched in absolute silence as Marcus used a heavy-duty angle grinder to cut into the hinges of my safe. Sparks flew across the expensive rug I had purchased just last month. Cassidy leaned against Marcus, running her hands through his hair. Then Marcus turned off the grinder, pulled Cassidy close, and kissed her passionately. It was not a brief, accidental kiss. It was the kiss of two people who had been intimately involved for a very long time. Ruby and Elias did not gasp. They did not look away in horror. Instead, Ruby raised her champagne glass toward the couple. "That dry military girl is gone for 6 months." Ruby laughed, her voice picking up perfectly on the hidden microphone. "That is more than enough time for us to transfer the assets into the name of Cassidy. Once the baby arrives, the true heir to this family will have everything." Cassidy placed a hand on her stomach, smiling wickedly at Marcus. The child she was carrying did not belong to Julian. It belonged to my husband. Any other woman might have broken down in tears. She might have screamed, rushed home to confront them, or called her friends in a state of hysterical grief. But I am a logistics officer. I do not react. I only calculate. I stared at the screen, analyzing the tactical disadvantage they had just placed themselves in. My house was equipped with a military-grade security system I had installed myself. I bypassed the standard alarms and accessed the emergency lockdown protocol. With a single tap on my screen, I activated the system. I watched through the camera as the heavy steel security shutters slammed down over the windows and doors, sealing the house completely. The champagne glasses shattered as Ruby screamed in panic. The four of them rushed to the front door, yanking uselessly at the handle. They were trapped inside a reinforced cage of their own making. I picked up my phone, calmly typed a message to Marcus, and hit send. "Enjoy your trip. The police are coming." Marcus stared at the illuminated screen of his smartphone. I watched through the high-definition feed as the blood completely drained from his face. The confident, slick corporate consultant vanished in an instant, replaced by a terrified thief caught red-handed. He slowly turned the screen toward his parents. Ruby dropped her crystal champagne flute. It shattered against the hardwood floor, sending sharp fragments and expensive liquor flying across the room. Elias froze, his mouth hanging open in silent disbelief. Cassidy was the first to vocalize their collective panic. She let out a piercing theatrical scream that echoed through the hidden microphones of my security system. They scrambled like trapped mice. Marcus threw the angle grinder onto the sofa and rushed toward the front door. He grabbed the brass handle and yanked it with all his might, but the electronic deadbolts were firmly engaged. Elias ran to the large bay windows, pounding his fists against the impenetrable steel shutters I had dropped moments earlier. The heavy metal did not even rattle. My house was designed to withstand extreme external threats, and it was certainly strong enough to hold 4 cowardly traitors inside. I sat in my car on the gravel shoulder of the highway, my hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, observing their chaos with the cold, calculated detachment of a logistics officer assessing a battlefield. When brute force failed, Cassidy resorted to her favorite weapon. She collapsed onto the expensive rug right next to the damaged safe and began to hyperventilate. Her hands clutched her chest dramatically as she gasped for air, tears streaming down her pale face. It was the same fragile victim routine she used at every family gathering whenever she did not get her way, the same routine that always made Julian rush to apologize to her. But Julian was not here. Instead, Ruby rushed to her side. My mother-in-law, who always carried herself with the righteous dignity of a prominent church leader, dropped to her knees. She wrapped her arms around Cassidy, glaring directly up at the security camera mounted in the corner of the room. "Breathe, sweetheart. Just breathe," Ruby coaxed, stroking the hair of the woman who was actively destroying her younger son's marriage. Ruby turned her furious gaze toward Marcus, who was still frantically pushing buttons on the disabled alarm panel. "Marcus, you have to do something right now. Look at what that crazy woman is doing to us. You cannot let anything happen to Cassidy. We must protect her. She is carrying your child, Marcus. She is carrying the true heir to our family. We are not losing my real grandchild because of this unhinged military psycho." The words echoed through the speakers of my tablet. The confession hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Cassidy was pregnant, but the baby did not belong to Julian. It belonged to Marcus. My husband had not only betrayed our marriage, but he had also betrayed his own brother, and his parents were actively celebrating it. They were entirely complicit in this sickening web of lies. Ruby viewed Cassidy and Marcus's unborn child as the true heir, completely disregarding Julian and whatever future I might have built with Marcus. The depth of their depravity was staggering. I did not cry. I did not scream. I simply recorded the feed, securing the audio and video files to multiple encrypted cloud servers. Every second of their panic, every word of their confession was now permanent evidence. Marcus stopped pacing. The panic in his eyes shifted into a dark, calculating glare. He looked down at my partially destroyed safe, then at the angle grinder resting on the sofa. He realized the fatal flaw in their situation. If he called the local police to report that they were trapped, the authorities would walk into a crime scene. They would see the tools, the damaged safe, and the obvious attempt at grand larceny. He could not risk a local police investigation. He needed a way to neutralize me completely to discredit me before I could show anyone the footage. He needed to control the narrative. I zoomed the camera in on his face as he pulled his phone back out. He did not dial the emergency dispatch for the local police department. Instead, he dialed a number I recognized instantly. He was calling the emergency command center at my military base. I turned up the volume on my tablet, listening intently as the call connected. Marcus cleared his throat, instantly slipping into his smooth, persuasive corporate voice. It was the same voice he used to close million-dollar deals and manipulate investors. Yes, hello, this is Marcus. I am the husband of Major Sienna. I need to be transferred to her commanding officer immediately. This is a life-or-death emergency, Marcus said, his voice trembling with perfectly fabricated terror. He waited a few seconds for the transfer, running a hand over his face to appear distressed. Colonel, thank God. You have to help us. Sienna has lost her mind. She is having a severe psychological breakdown. We are trapped inside our home. Marcus paused, listening to the response from my commander. Then he delivered the lie that was designed to end my career and my freedom. No, sir, she is not here physically. She is holding us hostage remotely. She locked all the steel shutters and disabled the doors. She is suffering from a massive PTSD episode. She called me screaming about enemies in the house, hallucinating that we are trying to attack her. She is completely unhinged and dangerous. She said she is coming back here to execute a threat. Please, you have to send the military police. You have to stop her before she hurts us or herself. She is armed and she is delusional. Marcus ended the call looking incredibly satisfied with his own lie. He looked down at Cassidy and Ruby, nodding to them to signal that his plan was in motion. He truly believed he had outsmarted me. He believed that the military would view me as a broken, hysterical woman, and that his polished word would be taken as absolute truth. He thought he had just turned the full weight of the United States Army against me. I sat in my car, the engine idling softly. I calmly closed the smart home application on my tablet and placed it on the passenger seat. My tactical breathing remained slow and steady. Marcus had just escalated a domestic betrayal into a federal incident. He had lied to a commanding military officer, a federal offense, while actively attempting to rob a commissioned officer. I checked my rearview mirror. My phone screen illuminated the dark interior of my vehicle. The caller ID flashed brightly. It was the base command. The military police were already being dispatched. My war had just begun. Red and blue lights flashed aggressively in my rearview mirror, cutting through the morning haze. Two armored vehicles belonging to the military police boxed my car against the guardrail of the interstate. I did not speed up or attempt to evade them. Panic is a luxury I discarded the day I put on my uniform. I smoothly shifted my car into park and turned off the engine, keeping both of my hands clearly visible on the steering wheel. 4 armed officers stepped out, their expressions taut and alert, moving with the precision of soldiers expecting a volatile situation. Marcus had painted me as an unstable, hallucinating threat, and these men were responding exactly as they were trained to do. A young captain I recognized from the logistics division approached my window, his hand hovering cautiously near his holster. I rolled down the window smoothly, ensuring no sudden movements. He ordered me to step out of the vehicle and keep my hands raised. I complied immediately, stepping onto the gravel shoulder with absolute silence. The cold air hit my face, but I focused entirely on maintaining total compliance. They patted me down quickly, their hands thoroughly checking for concealed weapons. Major Sienna, we have received a distress call regarding a hostage situation and severe psychological distress. We need to secure your service weapon, the captain said, his voice tense but professional. I nodded calmly, gesturing with a slight tilt of my head toward the glove compartment of my vehicle. My firearm is secured in the locked compartment. The key is in my left pocket. I am fully compliant, Captain. The captain retrieved my weapon, clearing the chamber with practiced efficiency before placing it into an evidence bag. Another officer placed handcuffs around my wrists, securing them tightly. I offered no resistance, no tearful protests, and no frantic excuses. I knew that anything I said in this moment would be twisted to fit the narrative of a hysterical woman suffering from a mental breakdown. Silence was my strongest shield. They placed me in the back of their armored vehicle, the heavy doors locking me inside a space designed for criminals and threats to national security. The drive back to the military base felt agonizingly slow, but I used the time to mentally organize my defense. I pictured Marcus sitting in my living room believing he had successfully neutralized me. He thought the military would lock me in a psychiatric ward based purely on his charismatic phone call. He underestimated the meticulous nature of military protocol, and more importantly, he severely underestimated me. When we arrived at the base, they escorted me directly to the high-security interrogation wing. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as they led me into a windowless room containing only a metal table and 2 bolted chairs. They removed my handcuffs and instructed me to sit. 10 minutes later, Colonel Henderson walked into the room. He was a stern, uncompromising man who had commanded my division for the past 3 years. His face was a mask of grave concern mixed with deep disappointment. He carried a thick folder, slapping it down on the table before taking the seat across from me. "Sienna, I received a very disturbing phone call from your husband." Colonel Henderson began, his voice echoing in the small room. "He claims you are holding your family hostage through your home security system, suffering from delusions and threatening to harm them. This is a very serious allegation, Major. If this is true, you are facing an immediate court-martial and an involuntary psychiatric hold." I looked my commander directly in the eyes, my expression devoid of the manic energy Marcus falsely reported. "Sir, I respectfully request permission to retrieve my personal tablet from the evidence bag your officers collected from my vehicle. It contains the exact answers to every question you have." Colonel Henderson studied my face, searching for any sign of the instability Marcus had described. Seeing only cold rationality, he signaled to the guard outside the door. A moment later, my tablet was placed on the table between us. I unlocked the screen with my fingerprint and opened the saved video files from my smart home application. I turned the device toward him and pressed play. "Colonel, I am not suffering from post-traumatic stress. I am not hallucinating. I simply locked my doors because my husband and his family are currently attempting to rob me." The high-definition footage played flawlessly. Colonel Henderson watched as Marcus and Cassidy passionately kissed beside my heavy steel safe. He listened as Ruby explicitly celebrated my deployment and casually discussed transferring my financial assets into Cassidy's name to provide for Marcus's illegitimate child. He saw Marcus using a heavy angle grinder to try and breach a safe containing classified deployment documents. The color drained from the face of my commander as he realized the magnitude of the lie he had been fed. Marcus had weaponized a federal military response to cover up a domestic robbery and a disgraceful affair. "This is unbelievable," Colonel Henderson muttered, leaning back in his chair, his eyes fixed on the screen. "He manipulated the United States military to facilitate grand larceny." He picked up his radio and ordered his officers to stand down their psychiatric protocols. "Major Sienna, you are hereby granted emergency administrative leave. Go handle your domestic situation. Do whatever it takes to secure your assets." While I was being cleared of all false charges at the military base, chaos erupted back at my house. Marcus and Cassidy realized that the police were not coming to rescue them. Desperation consumed them. Marcus grabbed the heavy iron fireplace poker from the hearth. He swung it with violent force against the reinforced glass of the rear patio door. The glass cracked, splintering into a dangerous web before finally shattering outward. Cassidy screamed as they crawled through the broken glass, tearing their expensive clothes and fleeing the house like the criminals they truly were. Stepping out of the military base with my administrative leave officially granted, I finally breathed the crisp morning air. I unlocked my vehicle and slid behind the steering wheel. Before I could even start the engine, a harsh, blaring alarm erupted from my phone. It was not a standard notification. It was a high-level security alert linked directly to my private financial portfolio. I grabbed the device, my eyes locking onto the flashing red text across the screen. An unauthorized wire transfer was being initiated. The amount was staggering. $1.5 million was actively being drained from the private trust fund left to me by my late grandfather. My grandfather worked his entire life to build that wealth, enduring the hardships of a segregated America to ensure his descendants would never have to beg for a seat at the table. That money was sacred. Marcus knew about the account, but he never had legal access to it. I pulled up the transaction details through my encrypted banking application. The request was originating from the main branch of First National Bank downtown. The authorization method listed on the screen made my blood boil. Marcus was using a forged power of attorney. He was banking on the assumption that I was currently locked in a psychiatric ward or a military holding cell, completely unable to contest the transaction. I slammed the car into drive, my tires kicking up gravel as I sped toward the city. The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place as I navigated the heavy, late-morning traffic. Marcus projected the ultimate image of a successful African-American corporate consultant. His custom-tailored suits and luxury car were just a meticulously crafted illusion. Over the past few months, I had noticed small inconsistencies, unexplained cash withdrawals, late notices arriving in the mail that he quickly snatched away and hid, whispered frantic phone calls taken in the middle of the night. Marcus was not a financial genius. He was drowning in massive, unmanageable debt. He needed cash immediately, and he was willing to steal my family legacy and use a wealthy white woman to get it. I arrived at the financial district in record time, abandoning my vehicle in a restricted loading zone. I strode through the heavy revolving glass doors of First National Bank, my combat boots clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. I remained in my full military uniform, the dark green fabric and shiny brass pins, commanding immediate respect from the security guards standing near the entrance. I bypassed the standard teller lines and walked directly toward the glass-enclosed VIP banking suites at the back of the lobby. There they were. Marcus and Cassidy sat across from a senior bank manager. Their clothes were torn and covered in dust from their desperate escape through my shattered patio window. Cassidy looked frantic, her manicured fingers twisting nervously in her lap. Marcus leaned over the manager's desk, his smooth voice cracking with thinly veiled desperation. "You need to expedite this wire transfer right now," Marcus demanded, slamming his fist lightly against the mahogany desk. "My wife is currently deployed on a classified military mission. I have full power of attorney, as you can see right there on the document. We are purchasing a commercial property, and if the funds do not clear the escrow account within the next 10 minutes, we lose the deal. Process the transfer." Cassidy chimed in, her voice shrill and demanding. "Do you know who my father is? If you do not push this through immediately, I will have his legal team shut down this entire branch. We do not have time to wait for your standard verification protocols. Just hit the approval button." I stood outside the glass wall, tapping my military credentials into my phone. Because my trust fund was linked to a high-security clearance profile, I possessed the authority to initiate a total federal freeze on all connected assets in the event of suspected domestic terrorism or major fraud. I watched the bank manager type the final digits of the authorization code into his computer. He looked nervous, clearly intimidated by the threats Cassidy was throwing at him. "All right, Mr. Marcus, the routing numbers are confirmed," the manager said, his finger hovering over the enter key. "I am submitting the final approval for the $1.5 million transfer now." I did not knock on the glass. I did not burst into the room screaming. I simply pressed the execution command on my encrypted application. The federal freeze engaged instantly. Inside the office, the manager pressed the enter key. The bank system immediately locked down. A blaring red warning screen flashed across his monitor. The manager gasped, pushing his chair back as if the computer had physically burned him. "What is going on?" Marcus snapped, standing up and leaning over the monitor. "Why did it stop? I told you to push it through." "I cannot," the manager stammered, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. "The system just rejected the transfer. The entire account has been locked by a federal override. Sir, this power of attorney is being flagged as fraudulent by the Department of Defense." Marcus turned pale. He looked at Cassidy, sheer panic washing over his face. His corporate facade completely crumbled, exposing the pathetic, desperate thief hiding underneath. I opened the glass door to the VIP suite and stepped inside, crossing my arms over my chest. I looked directly into the terrified eyes of my husband. Did you really think I would leave my grandfather's legacy unprotected? I asked, my voice calm, steady, and loud enough for everyone in the lobby to hear. The transaction is canceled, Marcus, and so is your luck. You thought you could blindside me while I was away serving my great country. You thought your lies could outsmart an officer. You were totally wrong about everything, and now you will face the consequences. Marcus stood completely frozen, his mouth opening and closing, without producing a single sound. The realization that his entire scheme had collapsed under a federal override seemed to paralyze him. He looked at the manager, then back to me. The arrogant man I married was gone, replaced by a sweating, desperate fraud. Cassidy, however, possessed a completely different kind of survival instinct. She was born into wealth and privilege, accustomed to having the world bend to her whim whenever she faced adversity. When she realized that intimidation and threats would not unlock the stolen $1.5 million, she instantly shifted her tactics. She recognized the visual dynamic in the room. I was a black woman standing tall in a military uniform, radiating authority and control. She was a petite, pregnant white woman. She knew exactly how to weaponize that contrast to manipulate the environment in her favor. Cassidy let out a sudden, ear-piercing shriek that echoed off the high marble ceilings of the bank lobby. She dramatically swiped a stack of brochures off the manager's desk, causing papers to scatter everywhere, and then threw herself onto the polished floor. She clutched her rounded stomach, curling into a fetal position, and began to sob with an intensity that deserved an Academy Award. "Please stop hurting me!" Cassidy screamed at the top of her lungs, pointing a trembling finger directly at me. "She is attacking me. She is threatening my baby. Somebody help me, please. She is unstable and she wants to hurt my unborn child." The reaction was instantaneous. The underlying biases of the civilian world snapped into place exactly as Cassidy had calculated. 3 armed bank security guards who had previously been standing idly near the entrance drew their batons and sprinted toward the VIP suite. They did not assess the situation. They did not ask the bank manager what had happened. They simply saw a weeping pregnant white woman on the floor and a black woman in combat boots standing over her. Their hands hovered over their holstered weapons as they surrounded me, their postures aggressive and threatening. "Ma'am, put your hands behind your head and step away from the victim right now," the lead guard yelled, his voice laced with adrenaline. He moved to grab my shoulder, fully prepared to forcefully apprehend me. This was the exact moment Cassidy wanted. She wanted me to react, to yell back, to defend myself passionately, so I would appear aggressive and out of control. She wanted me to match the stereotype she was projecting onto me. I refused to give her that satisfaction. I relied entirely on my military training, locking away my personal fury and operating purely on tactical protocol. I took one deliberate step backward to create a safe distance. I kept my hands visible at chest height, making no sudden movements. I did not raise my voice, but I projected it with the unquestionable command of a logistics officer. "Do not touch me," I stated firmly, my gaze locking onto the lead guard. "I am Major Sienna of the United States Army. I am operating under federal authority to freeze an account linked to suspected wire fraud. I have not touched this woman. I have not threatened this woman. She is staging a medical emergency to distract from a felony transaction. I strongly advise you to secure the premises and contact the local police department immediately to verify my federal orders." The guard hesitated, his hand pausing mid-air. The absolute calm in my voice contradicted the hysterical narrative Cassidy was screaming from the floor. He glanced at my uniform, noticing the brass pins and the name tape on my chest. He looked at the bank manager, who was still cowering behind his desk. "Is this true?" the guard asked the manager. The manager swallowed hard, nodding nervously. "She triggered a federal freeze on the system. The transaction was flagged." Hearing the manager confirm my authority, Cassidy wailed louder. "She is lying. She is a psycho. She locked us in a house earlier today and tried to kill us. Look at my clothes. Look at my knees. She displayed the small scrapes she had acquired while crawling through the glass of my shattered patio door. She did this to me. Arrest her. Marcus remained standing near the desk, utterly useless. He did not defend Cassidy, nor did he attempt to defuse the situation. He simply watched the doors, his eyes darting back and forth as he calculated his own escape route. He knew that the moment local law enforcement arrived, they would run the power of attorney document through federal databases and discover the forgery. He was a coward paralyzed by the consequences of his own greed. I stood my ground, immovable as stone. The lobby had grown completely silent, save for the exaggerated echoing sobs of my sister-in-law. Dozens of bank customers had stopped their transactions to watch the spectacle unfold through the glass walls of the VIP suite. I felt the weight of their stares, the silent judgments, and the societal assumptions. But I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact with the security guards who had now formed a tense perimeter around me. I was a soldier in enemy territory, and my objective was absolute containment. Call the police, I repeated to the bank manager, my voice unwavering. Request a supervisor and inform them that a federal officer is on site holding an active fraud scene. Do not let anyone leave this room. The manager fumbled for his desk phone, his hands shaking as he dialed emergency dispatch. Cassidy continued her theatrical weeping on the marble floor, but her performance was losing its power against my disciplined silence. The truth was inscribed in the digital footprint of the frozen transaction on the computer screen. I stood tall in my military uniform, embracing the cold reality of my completely crumbling marriage, fully ready to face whatever challenges came next. The heavy glass doors of First National Bank swung open, and 3 local police officers stepped into the tense lobby. Their presence shifted the room's dynamics. The bank security guards circling me like predators instinctively stepped back to let law enforcement take control. The lead police officer, a tall man with a seasoned expression, surveyed the scene. He saw Cassidy sobbing on the marble floor, Marcus hovering near the desk, and me standing perfectly still in my military uniform. The officer approached the VIP suite, asking the bank manager to explain the situation. The manager, visibly sweating and eager to absolve himself of liability, quickly summarized the events. He explained a $1.5 million wire transfer had been initiated using a power of attorney, but the transaction was intercepted and locked by a federal freeze. The police officer turned his attention to me. I did not wait for him to ask questions. I retrieved my military identification and placed it on the desk alongside my phone, displaying the federal override confirmation. I spoke clearly, ensuring my voice carried absolute authority. I explained I was Major Sienna, acting under military protocol to secure a compromised trust fund, and the individuals in the room were attempting to execute a fraudulent transaction. The officer examined my credentials carefully. He looked at the power of attorney document Marcus provided. The officer asked his dispatcher to run the authorization codes through the federal database. The silence in the room stretched out for 2 agonizing minutes. Everyone waited for the radio to crackle back to life. When it finally did, the dispatcher confirmed what I already knew. The power of attorney was a complete forgery, the notary's signature was falsified, and the federal freeze on the account was absolutely legally binding. The officer nodded, his demeanor hardening as he turned his attention directly to Marcus. "Sir, we need you to step away from the desk and place your hands behind your back," the officer commanded. The words hung in the air like a death sentence for my husband. Marcus realized the gravity of his situation. The slick, arrogant corporate consultant facade shattered entirely. He was facing immediate arrest for attempted wire fraud, forgery, and grand larceny. He looked at the police officers, then down at Cassidy, waiting for him to defend her. Marcus did exactly what a coward does when cornered. He bolted. He shoved the bank manager out of the way, created a brief moment of chaos, and sprinted toward the rear exit of the bank lobby before the officers could physically restrain him. "Hey, stop right there!" one of the officers yelled, giving chase immediately. But Marcus was fueled by pure panic. He abandoned his pregnant mistress on the floor, leaving her to face the legal consequences of their joint conspiracy. Cassidy stopped crying the exact second she realized Marcus left her behind. The theatrical tears dried up instantly. She pushed herself off the marble floor, brushing the dust from her designer dress, her eyes darting around the room as the remaining police officers moved to question her. She refused to speak to them. Instead, she pulled out her phone and made a frantic call to her father, demanding immediate legal intervention. Within 20 minutes, the atmosphere in the bank shifted once again. A sleek black town car pulled up outside, and two men in expensive tailored suits marched into the lobby. They were high-powered defense attorneys dispatched by the wealthy father of Cassidy. They operated with the arrogant efficiency of men used to making the law bend to their will. They bypassed the bank security and walked directly up to the police officers. The lead attorney presented his card, immediately shutting down any further questioning of his client. He cited jurisdictional overreach and demanded Cassidy be released into their custody, threatening to sue the precinct for wrongful detainment of a pregnant woman experiencing medical distress. The local police, lacking an immediate arrest warrant for Cassidy and not wanting to tangle with the billionaire's legal team over a complicated federal fraud case, reluctantly backed down. They informed the lawyers Cassidy remained a person of interest, but allowed her to leave the premises. The lawyers flanked her, preparing to escort her out of the bank. I watched the entire exchange with cold detachment. Money and privilege were powerful shields in the civilian world, but they could not erase the digital evidence I had secured. Cassidy was simply buying herself a temporary delay. Before leaving the VIP suite, Cassidy stopped. She told her lawyers to wait. She turned around and walked back toward me. The fragile weeping victim was completely gone. The mask slipped entirely, revealing the vicious, cold, and entitled woman hiding beneath. She stood inches from my face, her eyes burning with pure hatred. She did not raise her voice, but her words were laced with venom. "You think you have won because you stopped a bank transfer?" Cassidy hissed, a cruel smile forming on her lips. "You have no idea who you are dealing with. My family owns this city. My father plays golf with senators and federal judges. I will use every political connection we have to destroy your pathetic military career. I will make sure you are stripped of your rank, publicly humiliated, and thrown into a federal prison. You are nothing but a minor inconvenience to me." I looked down at her, completely unfazed by her threats. I did not flinch, and I did not break eye contact. "Your father's money cannot buy a new reality," I replied calmly. "You and Marcus are thieves, and the evidence is already locked in a federal vault. Run back to your mansion, Cassidy. The walls are going to close in very soon." She glared at me one last time before turning on her heel and marching out of the bank with her lawyers. I stood alone in the quiet banking suite, fully prepared to face the war she had promised. I left the financial district with a singular focus. Cassidy had promised a war, but she severely underestimated my capacity for prolonged engagements. I returned to my temporary quarters on the military base to change clothes. Tonight was the annual charity gala at the prestigious Heritage Church downtown. My in-laws Ruby and Elias were the founding patrons of this highly anticipated event. I knew they would not cancel their appearance. Their entire existence relied heavily on maintaining a flawless facade of wealth, power, and moral superiority within the local African American community. A federal fraud investigation and a shattered marriage would not stop them from putting on their finest garments and playing the roles of benevolent leaders. I traded my combat boots and tactical uniform for a floor-length emerald green evening gown. I pinned my hair back with absolute precision. I was not going to hide in the shadows while they smiled for the cameras and accepted the admiration of their peers. The church banquet hall was a spectacle of excessive extravagance. Crystal chandeliers illuminated tables draped in heavy white silk and adorned with towering floral centerpieces. Soft jazz music floated through the air, completely masking the toxic reality hiding beneath the surface. I handed my car keys to the valet and walked confidently through the arched double doors. Guests immediately turned their heads. I commanded attention, walking with a straight spine and an unyielding gaze. I spotted Ruby and Elias almost instantly. They stood near the main stage holding court with local politicians, wealthy business owners, and prominent community leaders. Ruby wore a glittering gold dress, her face stretched into a perfectly practiced artificial smile. Elias stood beside her, shaking hands, and graciously accepting praise for their supposed charitable contributions. They looked completely unaffected by the morning crisis. They truly believed their social standing made them entirely untouchable by the law or by me. The moment Ruby saw me approaching, her golden smile cracked violently. Her eyes widened in genuine horror. She quickly excused herself from a lively conversation with a city councilman and intercepted me before I could reach the center of the crowded room. She grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging sharply into my skin. "What are you doing here?" Ruby hissed under her breath, keeping her voice low to avoid drawing any unwanted attention from the nearby guests. "Are you completely out of your mind?" I glanced down at her hand gripping my arm, my expression completely blank and devoid of emotion. She immediately let go, stepping back as if the fabric of my dress had burned her fingers. "I am attending the gala, Ruby. I contributed $5,000 to this specific charity fund last month. I have every legal and moral right to enjoy this evening." Ruby looked around frantically, desperate to hide this confrontation from the watching eyes of the congregation. She grabbed my wrist again, pulling me forcefully toward a secluded antechamber off the main hallway. The heavy wooden door clicked shut behind us, muffling the festive jazz music. Ruby turned to face me, her chest heaving with heavily suppressed rage. "You need to leave this building right now," Ruby demanded, pointing a trembling finger at the exit door. "You have already caused enough damage today. Marcus is terrified, Cassidy is traumatized, and now you show up here to ruin the most important night of our entire year." I looked at her with pure, unadulterated disgust. "Marcus is a criminal and Cassidy is a manipulative fraud. They brought this upon themselves and you cheered them on." Ruby stepped closer, attempting to use her age and societal position to intimidate me into submission. "Listen to me very carefully, Sienna. We are a highly respected Black family in this city. We have a powerful legacy to uphold. You cannot go around airing our dirty laundry and inviting the police into our private business. It makes all of us look bad in front of these people. You need to drop this federal freeze nonsense immediately. You need to keep your mouth shut to protect the honor of this family and the respect of our community." "Honor?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet, but echoing sharply in the small room. "You sat in my living room and drank champagne while your son tried to steal my grandfather's legacy to fund a life with his white mistress. You openly celebrated stealing from a Black woman who serves her country just to pamper a spoiled heiress. You have no honor, Ruby. You just have a very expensive hollow mask." She opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off instantly. "Do not ever try to use the community or our race to gaslight me into accepting abuse. My grandfather marched for civil rights so I could build my wealth, not so you could hand it over to a woman who faked tears to get me arrested today." I turned away from her and reached for the brass doorknob. Ruby tried to block my path, pleading that Marcus was my husband, and I owed him my unconditional loyalty. I simply pushed past her, stepping out of the antechamber and re-entering the crowded, brightly lit banquet hall. I did not head toward the dining tables or the busy bar area. I mapped the layout of the massive room with a quick tactical assessment. I identified the primary audio-visual control booth situated on a raised platform near the rear of the hall. It was currently unmanned, the technical operator temporarily mingling near the buffet line to grab a plate of food. I walked directly toward the dark shadows of the booth, blending perfectly into the background. I pulled my encrypted smartphone from my clutch purse. The gala schedule indicated they were about to feature a video presentation highlighting the extreme generosity and moral leadership of Elias and Ruby. I connected my phone to the primary broadcasting network of the church. I had a completely different presentation in mind, and I was ready to show everyone the exact truth. The grand ballroom was buzzing with the low murmur of wealthy patrons and influential community leaders. I stood concealed in the shadows of the audio-visual booth, my phone synchronized with the primary projection system. On the main stage, the bright spotlights shifted to illuminate Elias. He adjusted his tailored tuxedo, flashing a practiced, benevolent smile that had fooled this congregation for decades. Ruby stood proudly beside him, holding his arm, the absolute picture of a devoted and pious matriarch. The crowd erupted into polite applause as Elias tapped the microphone to command their attention. My dear friends, brothers, and sisters of our beloved community, we are truly blessed tonight. Elias began, his voice booming with theatrical humility. Ruby and I have always believed that true leadership requires sacrifice. It requires a dedication to the moral fabric of our society. Tonight we are here to celebrate not just our family legacy, but the incredible charitable works this church has accomplished through your generous donations. We want to show you exactly how your money is changing lives. Elias gestured grandly toward the massive projector screen suspended above the stage. He asked the technicians to dim the chandelier lights and roll the presentation. This was my cue. I bypassed the standard video file and triggered my encrypted folder. The enormous screen flickered to life. Instead of footage showing smiling children and newly built community centers, the high-definition security feed from my living room illuminated the dark banquet hall. A collective gasp ripped through the audience. On the massive screen 50 feet wide, Marcus and Cassidy were passionately kissing right next to my damaged steel safe. The image was undeniable, but the audio was even more devastating. I pushed the master volume slider to the maximum level. The voice of Ruby echoed through the massive concert speakers, crystal clear and dripping with malice. That dry military girl is gone for 6 months. That is more than enough time for us to transfer the assets into the name of Cassidy. Once the baby arrives, the true heir to this family will have everything. The entire ballroom descended into absolute stunned silence. The jazz band abruptly stopped playing. The elite members of the congregation stared at the screen in pure horror. I watched from the booth as the color drained completely from Elias and Ruby. Their perfectly crafted masks of moral superiority melted away, leaving only naked panic. Ruby covered her mouth, her eyes darting wildly around the room. As the guests began to murmur in outrage, Marcus, who had been mingling near the front tables, froze like a deer caught in headlights. Before they could attempt to shut down the projector, I advanced the presentation to the next slide. The visual shifted from the scandalous affair to stark, undeniable financial documents. I displayed the forged power of attorney side by side with the church accounting records. The screen highlighted massive unauthorized wire transfers. It showed exact dates and amounts, proving that Ruby and Elias had been actively siphoning hundreds of thousands of dollars from the church charity fund. The money had been funneled through dummy corporations directly into the personal accounts of Marcus to cover his mounting, unmanageable debts. The documents proved they were not benevolent leaders. They were ruthless thieves stealing from their own community. The silence in the ballroom shattered, replaced by a deafening roar of outrage. Deacons and city councilmen stood up, pointing angrily at the stage. But the most explosive reaction did not come from the swindled donors. It came from the front row. Julian had been sitting at a prime table, completely unaware of the monstrous betrayal his family had orchestrated behind his back. I watched his face contort from confusion to pure, unadulterated agony as he processed the footage of his wife and his brother. He realized the child Cassidy carried, the baby he had been preparing to love and raise, was not his. He realized his parents knew the truth and had actively conspired to protect Marcus at his expense. Julian let out a guttural scream of absolute rage. He knocked his chair backward, sending it crashing to the floor, and vaulted over the table. He did not hesitate. He charged the stage with terrifying speed. Marcus tried to step back, raising his hands in a pathetic attempt to defend himself, but Julian tackled him with the force of a freight train. The two brothers crashed through the decorative floral arrangements lining the front of the stage and tumbled down the stairs into the crowd. The pristine high society gala instantly devolves into absolute chaos. Julian rained heavy punches down on Marcus, his fists driven by the ultimate betrayal. Marcus desperately tried to shield his face, blood already spilling from his nose and staining his crisp white dress shirt. Ruby screamed hysterically, rushing to the edge of the stage, begging someone to stop them. Elias tried to intervene, but a group of furious church elders blocked his path, shouting demands about the stolen charity funds. Guests scrambled in every direction. Tables were overturned. Crystal glasses shattered against the marble floor, and the expensive silk tablecloths were trampled underfoot. Women shrieked and pulled their husbands away from the violent brawl escalating in the center of the room. Cassidy, who had been sitting near the back, tried to slip out the side door, completely abandoning her new lover to face the wrath of the husband she had deeply betrayed. I stood in the shadows of the audio-visual booth, watching the entire fraudulent empire burn to the ground. I had not thrown a single punch. I had not raised my voice. I simply handed them the truth and let their own toxic actions destroy them. The sirens of approaching police vehicles began to wail in the distance, cutting through the shouts and the sound of breaking glass. The local authorities were coming to restore order, but the devastating damage was totally irreversible. Their deceptive reign finally ended tonight. The heavy oak doors of the ballroom burst open as dozens of armed police officers stormed the venue. Flashlights swept across the shattered crystal and overturned tables. I remained perfectly still inside the audio-visual booth, expecting the authorities to immediately apprehend Marcus and Elias for the massive financial fraud I had just broadcasted to the entire congregation. Julian was still restraining Marcus on the floor, his knuckles bloodied from delivering the brutal consequences his brother deserved. The lead detective, a burly man with a grim expression, marched straight down the center aisle. He did not look at the embezzled church funds displayed on the projector screen. He did not look at the disgraced pastor or the bleeding corporate consultant. He looked directly up at the booth. He pointed a thick finger straight at me. "Major Sienna, step away from the control panel and keep your hands where I can see them." The detective barked into his radio, signaling 4 officers to flank the elevated platform. I furrowed my brow, masking my immediate realization that the tactical board had just been flipped. Cassidy had made good on her threat. She had weaponized her father's immense political influence faster than I anticipated. The billionaire had bypassed the local jurisdiction and pulled massive strings from his luxury estate. The police were not here to arrest the actual thieves. They were here to neutralize the whistleblower. I complied with their orders, stepping out of the booth and descending the short staircase. 2 officers grabbed my arms roughly, slamming metallic handcuffs around my wrists with completely unnecessary force. The cold steel bit into my skin, but I kept my posture rigidly straight. "You are under arrest for domestic cyber terrorism, unauthorized access to civilian financial networks, and corporate espionage," the detective announced, reciting the fabricated charges loud enough for the shocked crowd to hear. The audacity of the accusations was staggering. Cassidy's father had crafted a narrative that I used military intelligence software to hack a civilian bank and terrorize a prominent local family. He effectively turned my legal federal freeze into an act of treason. They marched me through the ruined ballroom. Ruby and Elias had recovered slightly from their panic. Watching me being paraded in handcuffs, their absolute terror transformed into arrogant vindication. Ruby straightened her ruined gold dress, a wicked, triumphant smirk spreading across her face. Marcus pushed himself off the floor, wiping blood from his split lip. He laughed, a raspy, pathetic sound of pure relief. He truly believed his wealthy mistress had just saved him from federal prison. They loaded me into the back of a heavily armored police transport vehicle. The drive to the county holding facility was dark and silent. I was stripped of my evening gown, forced into an abrasive orange jumpsuit, and locked inside a damp concrete cell. The heavy iron door clanged shut, echoing with the finality of a tomb. The holding cell smelled of bleach and despair. I sat on the thin mattress, staring at the peeling gray paint on the wall. A normal person would break down in this environment. A normal person would weep at the sheer injustice of being framed by the very criminals she exposed. I simply began calculating my next maneuver. They thought burying me in a county jail cell would break my spirit. They forgot that military logistics officers are explicitly trained to operate behind enemy lines, surrounded by hostile forces and stripped of all visible resources. I took a deep breath, focusing my mind entirely on the mission ahead. While I sat in the freezing holding cell, Marcus, Ruby, and Elias returned to my property. The police had forced the smart home shutters open during their initial response to the hostage call, leaving my house completely vulnerable. The 3 of them walked back into my living room, stepping over the glass from the window Marcus had shattered earlier that day. They poured themselves fresh drinks celebrating their miraculous corrupt victory. Marcus paced the floor, boasting about how easily he manipulated the justice system. He called Cassidy profusely, thanking her father for the swift political intervention. They genuinely believed the war was over. They assumed I was sitting in a jail cell terrified of losing my military commission and facing decades in a federal penitentiary. They clinked their glasses together, toasting to their fraudulent success and my ultimate demise. Ruby sat on my custom sofa, dictating their final extortion plan. They decided they would visit me in the morning with a team of high-priced defense lawyers. They would offer me a vicious ultimatum. I would sign over the deed to my house and transfer the entire $1.5 million trust fund into their personal accounts. In exchange, Cassidy's father would magically make the cyber-terrorism charges disappear. They thought they had backed a desperate woman into an inescapable corner. They thought I would trade my grandfather's legacy for my own temporary freedom. Marcus confidently drafted the extortion contracts, printing them out on my own home office printer. He poured another glass of stolen liquor, completely oblivious to the fatal error they were currently making. They assumed they had confiscated all my weapons when the police seized my phone and my clearance badges. They did not realize my most dangerous, powerful, and hidden asset was still moving freely in the outside world, completely undetected by their highly corrupt political allies. They greatly underestimated the immense loyalty I had built over the past decade with the people who truly mattered in my life. My defense was already in motion, operating silently beneath their radar and walking right through the front doors of the heavily guarded military base. The criminals enjoying their stolen champagne in my living room had absolutely no idea their fragile house of cards was about to be permanently obliterated. I closed my eyes in the dark jail cell, waiting patiently for the morning to arrive. My ultimate retribution was coming very, very soon. The morning arrived not with the standard county jail breakfast, but with the heavy clang of iron doors and the arrival of 2 federal agents wearing dark suits. They bypassed the local deputies entirely, presenting a stack of heavily redacted transfer orders. The smug county detective who had arrested me at the church gala looked visibly nervous as he surrendered my custody over to the federal government. They shackled my wrists and ankles with heavy transport chains, a protocol reserved for high-risk federal detainees. I did not ask where they were taking me because I already knew my adversaries had escalated their attack. The political machinery belonging to the father of Cassidy was moving with ruthless billionaire efficiency. They loaded me into a black tactical vehicle, driving me away from the civilian justice system and plunging me directly into a federal nightmare. We arrived at a secure military holding facility located on the outskirts of the state. They placed me in an interrogation room that felt significantly colder and more isolated than the one from the previous morning. A senior investigator from the Department of Defense entered, tossing a thick manila folder onto the steel table. He did not offer me a seat. He simply opened the file and began reading the devastating allegations. Cassidy and her powerful father had not just accused me of hacking a civilian bank. They had submitted a highly sophisticated, anonymous dossier claiming I was actively stealing classified military logistics data. The fabricated report accused me of selling highly sensitive troop movement schedules on the international black market to cover my own supposed massive financial debts. They were taking the exact financial crimes Marcus had committed and projecting them entirely onto my military record. The severity of the accusation was completely staggering. Selling classified logistics data is an act of high treason. The investigator informed me that I was facing an immediate court-martial, a guaranteed dishonorable discharge, and a minimum of 20 years in a federal penitentiary. My entire decade of flawless military service, my reputation, and my freedom were being systematically eradicated by a wealthy family desperate to protect their cheating daughter. I sat in the steel chair, maintaining my rigid military posture, while the investigator outlined the sheer magnitude of my impending destruction. They stripped me of my rank insignia and my uniform, forcing me into a standard-issue gray detainee jumpsuit. I was officially classified as a severe threat to national security, locked in a subterranean cell with absolutely zero contact with the outside world. While I sat in federal isolation, the architects of my destruction were aggressively celebrating their perceived victory inside my own home. Marcus, Cassidy, Ruby, and Elias had fully regrouped in my living room, completely convinced they had permanently neutralized me. Marcus poured expensive scotch from my personal liquor cabinet, handing glasses to his parents and his pregnant mistress. They clinked their glasses together, laughing at the sheer brilliance of their corrupt political connections. Ruby stretched out on my custom leather sofa, praising the father of Cassidy for his swift and ruthless intervention. They genuinely believed that dropping a federal treason charge on my head would completely break my spirit and force my immediate surrender. Marcus sat at my dining room table, eagerly drafting the extortion documents they planned to present to me in federal custody. He typed out a comprehensive settlement agreement with absolute arrogance. The terms were brutally simple. I would sign over the deed to my property and legally transfer the entire $1.5 million trust fund into their offshore accounts. In exchange, the father of Cassidy would magically pull his political strings, retract the anonymous Department of Defense dossier, and make the federal treason charges disappear. Marcus printed the documents, stacking them neatly into a leather portfolio. He looked around my beautifully furnished home, treating it as his newly acquired kingdom. He told Cassidy they could remodel the master bedroom for the baby as soon as they forced me to sign away my life. Ruby and Elias chimed in, perfectly masking their own massive church embezzlement scandal behind their son's temporary triumph. They planned to use a portion of my stolen trust fund to quietly replace the charity money they had siphoned, neatly covering their tracks before the church elders could launch a formal audit. Elias practically gloated about how easily they had manipulated the narrative, painting themselves as the innocent victims of a deranged, violent military woman. They felt completely invincible. They thought the heavy federal doors locking me away had also locked away all my secrets and all my power. They assumed I was sitting in my cold cell, weeping in terror, desperately waiting for them to offer me a pathetic plea deal to save my own life. They were all fundamentally and entirely wrong. I sat on the rigid metal cot inside the military holding facility, my breathing slow and perfectly measured. I was completely stripped of my communication devices, my weapons, and my physical freedom, but my mind remained a lethal tactical weapon. The federal investigators thought they had captured a rogue traitor. My husband thought he had defeated a stubborn wife. They failed to realize that a logistics officer never enters a battlefield without securing a secondary supply line. I did not need a phone to execute my next maneuver. I did not need my military clearance to destroy their fraudulent empire. I had already positioned my most valuable asset precisely where she needed to be. While Marcus and Cassidy celebrated their hollow victory in my living room, my silent counterattack was already navigating the perimeter of their destruction. I just had to wait for the final trap to spring. The wealthy elite assume money and political influence are the ultimate weapons. They rely on intimidation to break opponents. They remained unaware my loyalty extended far beyond my uniform, reaching into the foundation of my household. True power is always invisible. The crisp morning air did nothing to chill the resolve burning inside Maria. She spent the last decade blending into the background of my home, dusting baseboards and polishing the mahogany dining table, while everyone assumed she was invisible. Marcus always treated her like furniture, a silent fixture, who did not understand English well enough to comprehend his hushed phone calls. He was incredibly foolish. Maria understood every single word. She walked briskly through the downtown financial district, her hands gripping a worn canvas tote bag. She bypassed the towering corporate law firms and headed directly toward the Federal Annex building, where my assigned military defense attorney, Captain David Thorne, operated his practice. Maria possessed something far more dangerous than security clearance. She possessed the unvarnished truth. When Maria reached the security checkpoint, she calmly placed her canvas bag onto the conveyor belt. The guards barely glanced at the contents. They saw plastic containers, a bundled sweater, and a painted ceramic sugar dispenser shaped like a bright yellow lemon. It looked like the remnants of a fired housekeeper carrying her meager belongings to a new job. They handed the bag back to her and waved her through. She took the elevator to the fourth floor, marching straight into the austere reception area of the defense office. She demanded to see Captain Thorne, immediately refusing to take a seat or accept polite dismissals from the young receptionist. Captain Thorne emerged from his office carrying a stack of heavily redacted case files concerning my treason accusation. He recognized Maria from the visitor logs I had submitted months ago for base access. He quickly ushered her into his soundproof conference room, locking the heavy wooden door behind them. Maria did not waste a single second with pleasantries. She reached into her canvas tote bag and pulled out the painted ceramic lemon. She gripped the top half, twisted it sharply to the left, and pulled it apart. The decorative kitchen item was completely hollow inside. Resting at the bottom of the ceramic base was a high-capacity encrypted USB flash drive. She placed the small black device onto the center of the polished conference table. "Marcus fired me yesterday morning right after Miss Sienna left for the base," Maria stated, her voice thick with righteous anger. "He threw $200 at my feet and told me to get out before he called immigration. He thought I was stupid. He thought I did not see what he was doing in that house for the past 3 months. He was sweating all the time, pacing the floors at 2 in the morning and using burner phones that he kept hiding inside the ventilation grate in the guest bathroom." Captain Thorne stared at the flash drive, his legal mind grasping the potential magnitude of the item. "Maria, what exactly is on this drive? I cannot submit unverified data into a federal court-martial proceeding without establishing a clear chain of custody." Maria crossed her arms, her posture radiating pure defiance. 3 weeks ago, Marcus brought a heavy briefcase into the home office. He locked the door, but he forgot that I hold the master override key for the housekeeping routine. He left his primary laptop unlocked while he went downstairs to argue with that terrible blonde woman who kept visiting him. Miss Sienna taught me how to run a silent background clone using a tactical script she left on the secure home server. I plugged this drive into his laptop. It copied every single hidden folder, every deleted email, and every offshore banking ledger he thought he had wiped clean. I took the drive, hid it in the kitchen, and waited for Miss Sienna to give the signal. Captain Thorne picked up the flash drive, an astonished smile spreading across his weary face. He realized he was not just holding a piece of evidence. He was holding a financial guillotine. He thanked Maria profusely, promising that her bravery would not be forgotten and ensuring she had a safe place to stay while the federal investigation unfolded. He placed the drive into a secure evidence pouch and immediately requested an emergency consultation with me at the military holding facility. 2 hours later, the heavy iron door of my subterranean cell clanked open. The federal guards escorted Captain Thorne into the austere interrogation room, allowing him exactly 15 minutes of unmonitored attorney and client privilege. They locked the door from the outside, leaving us completely alone. I sat at the steel table in my gray detainee jumpsuit, my posture perfectly straight. I did not ask him about the fabricated treason charges or the progress of the ruthless political campaign Cassidy and her father were waging against me. I simply looked at his hands. Captain Thorne sat down across from me. He slid a thick stack of legal briefs across the metal table. Concealed beneath the bottom folder was the small black USB drive. He slid the drive across the cold steel surface until it touched my bound hands. "Maria delivered the package," Captain Thorne whispered, keeping his voice incredibly low to avoid any ambient acoustic surveillance. "She executed the cloning protocol flawlessly. The data is entirely secure, but we have a massive problem. The entire drive is locked behind a military-grade cryptographic wall. Marcus might be a financial idiot, but whoever he is working for is not. The encryption requires a dual authentication bypass. I cannot open these files without triggering a digital alarm that will alert the original owners." I looked down at the flash drive resting against my fingertips. A cold, victorious smile finally broke through my stoic facade. The wealthy elite who framed me thought they had secured a total victory by locking me in this concrete box. They thought they had severed my communication and destroyed my resources. They were completely oblivious to the reality that my silent, loyal housekeeper had just smuggled the ultimate weapon directly into my hands. "I do not need you to decrypt it, Captain," I replied, my voice echoing softly with absolute dangerous certainty. I know exactly who built this encryption wall, and I know exactly who possesses the key to tear it down. Marcus thinks he is a mastermind, but he made a catastrophic tactical error. He betrayed the only person who holds the digital blueprint to his entire criminal network. I picked up the flash drive and concealed it within the palm of my hand. The puzzle was fully assembled. The battleground was set. I just needed to enlist the one man who hated my husband as much as I did. I was granted restricted bail 48 hours later, a highly unusual concession, secured entirely by the legal maneuvering of Captain Thorne. The military did not simply open the gates and let an accused traitor walk free. They clamped a federal tracking monitor tightly around my right ankle and strictly confined my movements to a 50-mile radius. My every electronic communication was monitored, and heavily armed military police were stationed at the perimeter of my temporary housing unit. I was technically out of the cell, but I was still very much a prisoner. Marcus and Cassidy were undoubtedly celebrating my release restrictions, assuming I was completely paralyzed by the overwhelming federal surveillance. They did not understand that restrictions only breed innovation. I knew I could not plug the smuggled flash drive into any device registered under my name without instantly triggering a Department of Defense alarm. I needed a ghost. I needed someone with exceptional technical expertise who possessed a motive strong enough to risk federal prison. I needed Julian. He was the only variable they had entirely overlooked in their arrogant equation. Julian was the polar opposite of my husband. While Marcus obsessed over tailored suits and climbing the corporate ladder, Julian spent his life hiding behind computer monitors. He was a brilliant information technology specialist who worked as a senior network architect for a private cybersecurity firm. His parents, Ruby and Elias, constantly belittled his career, treating his technical genius as a lesser achievement compared to the flashy consulting gigs Marcus fabricated. Julian had always sought their approval, which was exactly why he had married Cassidy in the first place. Cassidy brought the illusion of high society prestige that Ruby and Elias desperately craved. The revelation at the church gala had absolutely shattered him. He had lost his wife, his unborn child, his brother, and his parents, all in a single devastating night. He was completely broken, which made him incredibly dangerous. He had a motive built on pure, unadulterated vengeance. Escaping my federal babysitters required basic diversion tactics. I left my primary tracking phone inside my temporary quarters, attached to a mechanical oscillating fan to simulate casual movement around the room. I slipped out through a maintenance access tunnel, wearing a heavy hooded sweatshirt to obscure my face from the street cameras. I found Julian exactly where my intelligence gathering suggested he would be. He was sitting alone in the dark corner of a rundown, cash-only dive bar on the industrial edge of the city. He looked terrible. His knuckles were still heavily bruised from punching Marcus at the gala. He stared blankly at a half-empty glass of whiskey, a man completely stripped of his future. I slid into the booth across from him, keeping my hood pulled low over my eyes. Julian did not look up immediately. When he finally registered my presence, his eyes hardened with a mixture of grief and bitter resentment. "Are you here to gloat, Sienna?" Julian asked, his voice rough and laced with exhaustion. "Because if you are, you can save your breath. You blew up my entire life. You humiliated my family in front of the whole city. I have nothing left to give you." I kept my hands flat on the sticky wooden table, maintaining a perfectly level tone. "I did not blow up your life, Julian. I simply turned on the lights so you could see the explosives Marcus and Cassidy planted under your floorboards. I am not here to gloat. I am here to offer you the one thing you actually want right now." He let out a dark, humorless laugh, taking a slow sip of his whiskey. "And what exactly could an accused federal traitor possibly offer me?" I leaned forward, ensuring my voice did not carry past our booth. "Total, unmitigated retribution." I reached into the pocket of my sweatshirt and pulled out a small stack of printed documents Captain Thorne had secured for me. I slid them across the table. Julian glared at the papers, initially refusing to touch them. "Look at the dates, Julian," I commanded quietly. "Look at the routing numbers." He finally picked up the top sheet. It was a redacted copy of the church financial ledgers I had broadcasted at the gala, but with additional annotations. His eyes widened as he read the highlighted sections. Ruby and Elias did not just find out about the affair recently. Look at the timeline of the wire transfers. They were siphoning charity money to pay off the gambling debts of Marcus over a year ago. They knew Cassidy was sleeping with him long before she got pregnant. They actively funded the lifestyle of Marcus to keep Cassidy happy because her father was donating massive sums of money to their church. They sold you out to keep their wealthy donors satisfied. The devastating truth physically hit him. The betrayal was not a sudden mistake. It was a calculated long-term conspiracy orchestrated by his own parents. His grip tightened on the papers until his knuckles turned white. Marcus is currently trying to frame me for high treason. I explained, placing the black USB drive directly onto the center of the table. This drive contains the complete clone of his personal laptop. It holds the definitive proof of his fraud, his offshore accounts, and the full extent of the money laundering operation he is running for the father of Cassidy. The data is locked behind a cryptographic wall. If I touch it, the feds will trace it. If you decode it, we can burn their entire empire to the ground. Julian stared at the small black device. The furious network architect took his place. He reached out and closed his fist tightly around the encrypted flash drive. "We need a secure location," Julian stated, his voice suddenly sharp and entirely focused. "I am going to destroy them." I nodded in absolute agreement, quietly watching the destructive fire finally ignite in his eyes. We left the dive bar through the rear alleyway to avoid lingering surveillance cameras. Julian drove us to a dilapidated cash-only motel near the industrial shipping yards. It did not ask for identification, and certainly did not boast high-speed internet. This was exactly what we needed. We rented a room at the end of the second-floor corridor, paying the tattooed clerk with crumpled $20 bills. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cheap industrial cleaner, featuring peeling floral wallpaper and a flickering neon sign buzzing outside the single window. Julian immediately went to work. He pulled a specialized reinforced laptop from his dark backpack, completely disconnecting the wireless network receiver to ensure we remained entirely off the grid. He connected the black flash drive Maria had provided, his fingers flying across the keyboard with a speed and precision that proved exactly why he was a senior network architect. I stood by the window, peering through the dusty blinds to monitor the parking lot. The tracking monitor secured around my ankle felt heavy, a constant reminder of my restricted federal bail, but my mind was entirely focused on the digital battlefield unfolding on the small desk behind me. Julian typed line after line of complex code, navigating the sophisticated cryptographic wall Marcus had paid someone to build. "This encryption is not standard corporate security," Julian murmured, his eyes reflecting the harsh blue light of the computer screen. "This is military-grade AES 256-bit encryption combined with a localized biometric lock. Marcus did not build this. He does not even know how to reset his own email password. Someone with serious underworld connections handed this architecture to him. If I force the entry incorrectly, it will trigger a thermal wipe and permanently destroy the physical drive." I stepped away from the window and approached the desk. "Can you bypass the thermal trigger without alerting the original architect?" I asked, watching the complex algorithms scrolling rapidly down the monitor. Julian let out a sharp, confident exhale. "They built a digital fortress, Sienna, but every fortress has a maintenance hatch. They assumed any intruder would try to break the front door. I am going to reverse engineer the background update protocol and slide right through the service entrance." For the next 3 hours, the only sound in the grim motel room was the rapid, rhythmic clicking of his keyboard. I watched Julian transform his profound, shattering grief into razor-sharp technical focus. He was dismantling the digital armor of his betrayers piece by specific piece. Finally, a sharp green notification box popped up on the center of the screen. The cryptographic wall dissolved. The encrypted files unspooled, revealing dozens of hidden folders, accounting spreadsheets, and thousands of archived email communications. "We are in." Julian stated, his voice tight with anticipation. He clicked on the primary master ledger, expanding the document across the entire monitor. We leaned in close, our eyes scanning the endless rows of numerical data and offshore routing numbers. What we discovered in those first few minutes was completely horrifying. Marcus was not just a failing corporate consultant hiding a few bad investments. He was operating a massive, highly sophisticated money laundering syndicate. The ledger detailed tens of millions of dollars flowing from illicit overseas businesses directly into domestic shell corporations. We traced the origin points of the illegal funds. They all led back to a single, centralized holding company owned entirely by the wealthy father of Cassidy. "Look at these transactions," Julian whispered, pointing at a column of massive deposits. "Her father is running illegal weapons manufacturing and unregulated chemical exports in Eastern Europe. He is funneling the dirty cash back into the United States, and he is using Marcus as his primary financial mule to wash the money clean." Marcus was never a real consultant. He is a high-level criminal accountant. The puzzle pieces locked together with devastating clarity. Cassidy did not marry Julian out of love, and she did not sleep with Marcus out of mere lust. She infiltrated the family to secure a disposable asset. Marcus was desperate for wealth and completely devoid of morals. He was the perfect, gullible target to handle her father's dirty money. But the betrayal ran significantly deeper than the affair between Marcus and Cassidy. Julian clicked on a secondary folder labeled with a subtle cross icon. He opened the attached banking records, and all the remaining color immediately drained from his bruised face. I stared at the screen, a cold wave of absolute disgust washing over me. The primary shell company designated for washing the illicit cash was not a random corporate entity. It was the Heritage Church Charity Fund managed by Ruby and Elias. "My parents," Julian gasped, his voice cracking as he scrolled through the undeniable proof. "They are actively washing millions of dollars of cartel money through the church donation accounts. They are claiming the dirty money as anonymous charitable contributions, taking a massive percentage off the top and funneling the clean cash back to the father of Cassidy. They are all in on it. They are a federal crime syndicate." Ruby and Elias had built their entire social standing, their righteous moral authority, and their pristine community reputation on a foundation of international crime. They despised my military career because I represented the exact federal law enforcement they were actively conspiring against. They embraced Cassidy because she was the direct pipeline to their corrupt, overflowing bank accounts. The family I had married into was nothing more than a highly organized criminal enterprise masking itself behind Sunday sermons and tailored suits. I placed my hand firmly on the shoulder of Julian, grounding him as his entire reality fractured for the second time that day. We possessed the exact digital evidence required to completely exonerate me of all fabricated treason charges, and we were now fully prepared to send every single one of them directly into federal prison cells. Before Julian could safely eject the flash drive from his reinforced laptop, a harsh alarm erupted from the computer speakers. The screen flashed a brilliant crimson. A secondary tracking beacon embedded deep within the encryption had just been triggered. We bypassed the thermal wipe, but the architect designed a failsafe to alert the syndicate the exact moment the ledger was opened. Cassidy's wealthy father now knew his offshore accounts had been compromised, and he possessed our global positioning coordinates. "Pack the laptop and secure the drive right now," I commanded, my voice dropping an octave as my military combat training instantly overrode my shock. Julian scrambled to comply, his hands shaking violently as he yanked the black device from the port. Seconds later, the flickering neon sign outside our single window abruptly went dark. The low hum of the street lamps vanished. A localized electromagnetic pulse had knocked out the power grid for the entire block. This was a coordinated tactical blackout executed by professional mercenaries. I grabbed Julian by the collar and shoved him roughly into the small windowless bathroom at the back of the motel suite. "Do not make a single sound, and do not let go of that drive," I whispered harshly. I did not have my standard-issue firearm, which remained confiscated in a federal evidence locker. I scanned the dark room, my eyes rapidly adjusting. I picked up a solid brass floor lamp resting near the television, unscrewing the heavy base to use as a bludgeoning weapon. The flimsy wooden motel door did not creak open. It exploded inward, splintering off its cheap hinges with a deafening crash. Two massive men dressed in unmarked black tactical gear stepped into the room. Green laser sights sliced through the dusty darkness attached to heavily suppressed automatic weapons. They moved with the lethal efficiency of trained killers expecting to find two terrified civilians cowering under the sheets. They completely failed to anticipate a seasoned logistics and combat officer waiting patiently in their immediate blind spot. The moment the first mercenary stepped past the doorframe, I lunged forward. I swung the heavy brass base upward with devastating force, striking his wrist and instantly dislodging his weapon. Before he could react, I drove my knee directly into his solar plexus, followed by a brutal, precise strike to his throat. He collapsed to the floor, gasping for air and incapacitated. The second mercenary pivoted sharply, the green laser of his weapon tracking blindly toward the commotion. He fired a suppressed round that shattered the television screen. I did not retreat. I closed the distance, instantly diving beneath his line of sight. I swept his legs out from under him, sending his massive frame crashing onto the ruined wooden floorboards. I grabbed the suppressed firearm dropped by the first attacker, racking the slide and pressing the cold steel barrel firmly against the temple of the second mercenary. He froze immediately, recognizing the undeniable posture of a highly trained soldier willing to pull the trigger. "Stay down," I commanded with cold authority. I struck him across the jaw with the heavy stock of the weapon, knocking him completely unconscious. I quickly stripped both men of their extra ammunition magazines and secured their secondary tactical knives. Heavy footsteps pounded against the exterior metal walkway. More mercenaries were rushing up the stairs to secure the perimeter. We were severely outnumbered and completely outgunned. Holding a static position inside a second-floor motel room was a guaranteed death sentence. I rushed to the bathroom, grabbing Julian by the arm and dragging him toward the rear balcony. "We cannot use the front door or your car in the parking lot. They have already compromised your license plates," I stated, shoving the captured weapon into my waistband. We climbed over the rusty iron railing of the rear balcony. I dropped down, first landing quietly on the wet pavement of the trash alley below. I caught Julian as he tumbled down after me, silencing his panicked grunt. Flashlights swept fiercely across the upper level of the motel above us. Men shouted aggressive commands, tearing apart the room we had just occupied. The father of Cassidy had dispatched a heavily armed extraction squad to retrieve his stolen financial data and permanently eliminate the witnesses. I led Julian through the narrow, rain-slicked alleyways of the industrial shipping district. We navigated the maze of towering cargo containers and rusted fences, moving strictly within the deepest shadows. Julian stumbled repeatedly, his breath ragged and uneven. He was a brilliant computer architect entirely unaccustomed to physical evasion and lethal combat. I pushed him forward relentlessly, reminding him that the small black flash drive tucked inside his pocket was the only leverage keeping us alive. We reached the edge of a commercial loading dock where several generic delivery trucks were parked for the night. I bypassed the newer models and approached an older cargo truck. Using one of the confiscated tactical knives, I easily forced the lock on the driver's side door. I slid beneath the steering column, stripping the ignition wires and hot-wiring the engine with practiced military efficiency. The heavy diesel motor roared to life. Julian scrambled into the passenger seat, clutching his backpack tightly against his chest. I slammed the truck into gear and sped away from the industrial yard, keeping the headlights completely turned off until we merged onto the desolate interstate highway. The aggressive adrenaline of the close-quarters combat slowly began to fade, replaced by a chilling reality. Julian stared at his trembling, blood-stained hands in the dim light of the dashboard. The legal strategy we planned just hours ago was no longer sufficient. We were actively being hunted by a ruthless international crime syndicate. I looked out at the glowing city skyline, my grip tightening aggressively around the steering wheel. Cassidy and Marcus had pushed this conflict far past the point of a simple courtroom battle. They escalated a fraudulent divorce into an actual war for survival. The stolen cargo truck rattled violently as I pushed the heavy diesel engine to its absolute limit down the desolate stretch of the interstate. The glowing city skyline faded in our rearview mirrors, but the chilling reality of our situation remained firmly seated in the cab with us. We were no longer fighting a simple legal battle over a forged power of attorney or a destroyed marriage. We were actively being hunted by a heavily armed international crime syndicate. I gripped the large steering wheel, my mind rapidly calculating our severely limited options. We could not go to the local authorities because Cassidy and her billionaire father clearly owned the political infrastructure of the city. We could not go to my military command because I was currently classified as a rogue traitor facing a fabricated espionage charge. We were entirely on our own. "Where are we going?" Julian asked, his voice trembling slightly as he clutched his backpack to his chest. "They have mercenaries, Sienna. They just tried to assassinate us in a motel room. How do we fight a billionaire who can deploy a private army?" "We do not fight his army," I replied, keeping my eyes locked on the dark road ahead. "We are going to make his army fight itself. We are transitioning from a defensive evasion strategy into offensive psychological warfare." I steered the truck off the main highway, navigating through a series of winding back roads until we reached an abandoned industrial warehouse district on the far outskirts of the county. I parked the stolen vehicle inside a dilapidated corrugated metal storage bay, effectively hiding it from any aerial surveillance or passing patrols. We sat in the dark, cold cab of the truck. I turned to Julian, my expression completely void of fear. I needed him to transition from a grieving, terrified husband into a hardened tactical operative. "The greatest weakness of any criminal syndicate is not their firepower," I explained, leaning closer to him. "It is their complete lack of trust. Marcus Cassidy Ruby and Elias are only united right now because they believe they have successfully eliminated the threat. They are bound together by greed and a false sense of security. If we shatter that security, their alliance will instantly collapse. They will turn on each other like starving wolves." Julian wiped a streak of dirt from his bruised face, his analytical mind beginning to catch up with my military strategy. "How do we break their trust? They think we are either dead or running for our lives." "We use the exact data you just decrypted," I stated. "I need you to draft a highly secure encrypted electronic communication. We are going to forge a digital message from Marcus, directed to a senior field agent at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. You must make it look completely authentic. We need it to appear as though Marcus is terrified of the escalating violence and is actively trying to secure a federal immunity deal." Julian opened his reinforced laptop, the battery glowing brightly in the dark cabin. He bypassed his wireless receiver block using a highly localized, untraceable satellite bounce. "I can spoof the internet protocol address of Marcus perfectly. I have access to his personal network architecture from the cloned drive. What exactly do you want the message to say?" "Write that Marcus is offering to turn state's evidence." I instructed, my voice sharp and deliberate. "Have him explicitly offer to surrender the entire offshore money laundering operation. Tell the FBI he has the routing numbers for the illegal weapons manufacturing accounts belonging to the father of Cassidy. Most importantly, have him state that he is willing to testify that Cassidy orchestrated the entire fraudulent trust fund heist to cover her own tracks." Julian's fingers flew across the keyboard, his initial terror fully replaced by cold, calculated vengeance. He drafted the federal communication with meticulous detail, inserting specific financial jargon and account numbers that only Marcus or his closest co-conspirators would possibly know. The message was a perfect, devastating masterpiece of digital forgery. It painted Marcus as a desperate coward, ready to burn his wealthy mistress and his own parents just to save himself from a federal prison sentence. "The message is drafted," Julian confirmed, his eyes reflecting the harsh blue light of the screen. "But sending this to the actual FBI right now is too dangerous. We do not know who is on the payroll of her father. If a corrupt agent intercepts this, they will just bury it." "We are not sending it to the FBI," I replied, a dark smile forming on my lips. "We are going to leak it directly to Cassidy." Julian stared at me instantly, grasping the sheer brilliance of the tactical maneuver. He did not need me to explain the mechanics. He immediately began configuring a delayed routing script. "I can bounce the encrypted package through a compromised proxy server. I will intentionally design a minor flaw in the cryptographic wall and drop it right into the personal digital ecosystem of Cassidy. Her security software will flag it as an intercepted outgoing message from the primary network of Marcus. She will think she just caught him trying to sell out her entire family. Execute the script, I commanded. Julian pressed the enter key. A green progress bar flashed across the screen, confirming the forged package had successfully infiltrated the luxury estate of our enemies. The digital trap was officially set. We had just dropped a psychological hand grenade directly into the center of their fragile criminal alliance. I leaned back against the worn fabric of the driver's seat, watching the glowing monitor softly illuminate the surrounding darkness. Cassidy was inherently paranoid, deeply driven by the ruthless, toxic survival instincts of her wealthy, corrupt upbringing. The exact moment she decrypted that message, she would completely lose her mind. She would instantly assume the man who betrayed his own brother was preparing to betray her. The paranoia would consume her. I navigated the stolen cargo truck through the labyrinth of abandoned industrial roads until we reached a desolate parking structure overlooking the city skyline. It provided a perfect vantage point, offering multiple escape routes while shielding us from immediate detection. I killed the heavy diesel engine. The sudden silence inside the cab was deafening, broken only by the rapid, shallow breathing of the man sitting in the passenger seat. Julian stared at his glowing laptop screen, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. We had successfully planted the digital explosive. Now, we simply had to wait for the detonation. I reached into my tactical cargo pocket and retrieved a small encrypted audio receiver. When I originally purchased my home, my military logistics background dictated that I prepare for any potential breach of security. I had personally installed microscopic high-definition microphones inside the ventilation grates of every primary room. Marcus never knew they existed. He was too busy admiring his reflection in the custom mirrors to ever notice the tiny black sensors securing our perimeter. I connected the receiver to the auxiliary port of the laptop. Sync the audio feed to the living room frequency, I commanded quietly, handing Julian the connection cable. Cassidy will not wait until morning to confront him. She is operating on pure adrenaline and absolute terror. She is heading to my house right now. Julian quickly routed the audio signal through his proxy servers to mask our physical location. A soft burst of static hissed through the computer speakers, followed by the clear, ambient sound of my own living room. We could hear the faint clinking of ice against crystal. Marcus was evidently still drinking my expensive scotch, pacing the hardwood floors, and reveling in his temporary victory. He had absolutely no idea that his entire world was about to violently collapse. We sat in the freezing cabin of the truck, the digital clock on the dashboard ticking forward with agonizing slowness. 10 minutes passed. Then the distinct sharp sound of a heavy door slamming open echoed through the speakers. High-heeled shoes clicked aggressively against the foyer tiles. Cassidy had arrived, and she was moving with the destructive force of a hurricane. "You pathetic, cowardly, miserable fool!" Cassidy shrieked at the top of her lungs, her voice distorting the sensitive microphones. The sound of a heavy glass tumbling to the floor and shattering confirmed she had physically confronted him. "Did you really think I would not find out? Did you actually believe you could sell my family to the federal government and walk away with immunity?" "What are you talking about?" Marcus yelled back, his voice thick with confusion and alcohol. "Cassidy, calm down. Put the glass down. I have not spoken to anyone from the government. We just won. Sienna is locked in a military cell facing 20 years for treason. We beat her." "Do not lie to me!" Cassidy screamed, her voice cracking with absolute hysteria. "My security system just intercepted your outgoing encrypted email. You sent a message to the Federal Bureau of Investigation offering to turn state evidence. You gave them the routing numbers for the weapons manufacturing accounts. You gave them everything. You are trying to trade my father for your own freedom." Julian and I exchanged a dark, victorious glance in the cab of the truck. The digital forgery had worked flawlessly. The seed of absolute paranoia had taken deep root, and the resulting poison was rapidly destroying their fragile alliance. "I did not send any email," Marcus roared, the panic finally bleeding into his voice as he realized the magnitude of her accusation. "I do not even know how to encrypt an email like that." "Think about it, Cassidy. Why would I burn the operation right after we successfully framed Sienna? It makes absolutely zero sense. It makes perfect sense because you are a terrified, weak little man, Cassidy countered viciously. You saw the police raid the church gala tonight. You saw Julian attack you. You realize the local authorities are sniffing around the edges of the charity fund. You panicked. You always panic when things get difficult. You thought you could cut a secret deal to save your own skin before the federal agents connect the charity fraud to the offshore accounts. You are trying to throw me to the wolves. I gave up my entire life for you, Marcus shouted, his voice echoing loudly through the empty house. I betrayed my wife. I betrayed my own brother. I destroyed my marriage because you said we were building an empire together. I am protecting our future. I am protecting our baby. A sharp, cruel laugh erupted from Cassidy. It was a terrifying sound completely devoid of any warmth or humanity. It was the laugh of a wealthy predator who had finally grown bored of playing with her captured prey. The silence that followed her laughter was incredibly heavy. Julian leaned closer to the speakers, his hands gripping the edges of the laptop tightly. You really are the most gullible, pathetic man I have ever met, Cassidy sneered, her voice dropping to a lethal, venomous whisper. There is no empire for us, Marcus. You are never going to be my partner. You are just a convenient, desperate mule. My father needed a corporate consultant with clean records and massive debts to wash his international cash. You were perfectly stupid, perfectly greedy, and perfectly willing to ruin your own family for a taste of real money. What are you saying? Marcus asked, his voice suddenly very small, trembling with the horrifying realization that he had been completely used. I am saying that you are just a disposable asset, Cassidy stated. Want to know the absolute best part? You destroyed your marriage and betrayed Julian for nothing. This baby does not belong to you, Marcus. It never did. I am pregnant by my personal trainer. I just needed a believable timeline and a gullible fool. You were an easy target. The silence stretching through the audio receiver was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Marcus had just been stripped of everything. His marriage, his brother, his supposed child, and his grand illusion of building a corporate empire had all been brutally vaporized by a single arrogant confession from the woman he threw his life away to protect. I sat in the freezing cab of the cargo truck watching Julian stare at the laptop screen. Then the silence broke. It did not break with a shout or a plea. It broke with the unmistakable metallic click of a heavy slide racking around into the chamber of a firearm. Marcus had always kept a registered handgun in the locked drawer of the home office desk. He must have retrieved it after his initial panic over the federal freeze. Marcus, put that down! Cassidy screamed, her voice completely stripped of its previous venomous authority. The wealthy predator was instantly reduced to a terrified hostage. Are you insane? You point that at me and my father will have you buried under a federal prison. Your father is going to kill me anyway, Marcus roared, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated madness. You set me up, you used me to wash dirty cartel money, and now you are trying to hand me over to the federal government to save your own skin. Get away from the door. Sit down on the floor right now. The sound of a heavy physical struggle echoed through our speakers. Cassidy shrieked as a loud thud shook the microphones, indicating Marcus had physically shoved her to the ground. A single deafening gunshot rang out, followed by the sound of shattering porcelain. He had fired a warning shot, likely obliterating one of my antique vases in the foyer to prove he was entirely serious. He is going to kill her, Julian whispered, his face pale as he pulled the headphones away from his ears. He hated Cassidy for what she had done to him, but the reality of an active hostage situation was horrifying. We need to move, I commanded, shutting down the audio receiver and throwing the vehicle into gear. I navigated the heavy cargo truck out of the abandoned warehouse district, speeding back toward my suburban neighborhood. The psychological grenade we dropped had detonated with far more destructive force than anticipated. Marcus was no longer a calculating fraud. He was a cornered, desperate animal holding a loaded weapon. By the time we approached my subdivision, the quiet streets had transformed into a war zone. Emergency lights illuminated the dark sky, reflecting off the manicured lawns. I parked the stolen truck 2 blocks away. Julian and I moved on foot, staying within the deep shadows of the large oak trees. Dozens of police cruisers blocked the intersections. A heavily armored tactical vehicle was parked directly on my front lawn, destroying the landscaping I had painstakingly maintained. Armed men in dark gear were taking strategic positions behind the transport. A police helicopter circled overhead, shining a blinding spotlight directly onto the shattered bay windows of my living room. Julian pulled his hood low over his face, clutching his backpack containing the decrypted hard drive tightly against his chest. We stood near a cluster of terrified neighbors who had been evacuated from their adjacent properties. Then I heard the frantic, unmistakable wailing of my mother-in-law. Ruby and Elias were standing near a yellow caution tape barricade surrounded by officers keeping them back. Their pristine facade had been completely obliterated. Ruby was sobbing hysterically, her expensive evening gown ruined, her makeup smeared across her face. Elias looked incredibly frail, arguing desperately with a police sergeant. They were watching their golden child completely self-destruct. News vans were already pulling up to the intersection, setting up cameras to broadcast the spectacular downfall of the prominent church leaders. I stepped out of the shadows, walking calmly and deliberately toward the flashing lights of the barricade. I did not hide my face. I moved with the rigid, undeniable posture of a military officer. Ruby turned her head, her tear-streaked eyes catching sight of my approach. She gasped, grabbing the arm of Elias and pointing frantically in my direction. They broke away from the police sergeant and sprinted toward me, completely abandoning all of their previous arrogance and hostility. "Sienna! Sienna, thank God you are here!" Ruby cried out, grabbing my arms with desperate, trembling hands. "You have to help us. They are going to kill him. The police are going to shoot Marcus." Elias stepped forward, his eyes wide with absolute panic. "Please, Sienna, you have to talk to the police commander. Tell them you are his wife. Tell them you are a military officer. You have training for this kind of combat situation. You can go inside that house and talk him down. You know how to disarm people. You have to save him." Ruby fell to her knees right there on the wet pavement, sobbing uncontrollably. The woman who had actively conspired to steal my trust fund just hours ago was now begging for my mercy. "He is your husband, Sienna. You took a vow before God. He made a terrible mistake, but he is a good man. Please use your rank. Go inside and save my boy before those snipers take him away from me." I looked down at the weeping woman clutching the fabric of my trousers. I looked at the man who had embezzled charity funds to cover up the crimes of his son. I looked past them toward the heavily armed tactical team surrounding the house I had purchased with my own hard-earned money. The flashing emergency lights illuminated the absolute wreckage of their corrupt family empire. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I did not feel fear. I felt the cold, hard clarity of absolute justice finally arriving to collect its terrible debt. "Please, Sienna," Ruby wailed, her fingers clawing at the dark fabric of my tactical jacket. "You took a vow to protect him, save him from himself before they shoot him dead." Elias nodded frantically. "Just walk through that front door and talk him down. You are the only one who can fix this disaster." I looked down at the two people who had actively plotted to steal my grandfather's legacy just hours earlier. They wanted me to walk into an active hostage situation unarmed to face a desperate criminal. They viewed my life as entirely disposable, a shield to protect the son who orchestrated a massive federal crime syndicate. I stepped back, forcing Ruby to release her grip. I looked at my in-laws with cold detachment. "I am logistics, not a hostage negotiator," I replied, my voice slicing through the frantic noise of the sirens. "I do not save traitors. I supply the battlefield." I turned my back on their sobbing and walked away from the civilian barricade. I identified a black command vehicle parked near the intersection. I marched directly toward the tallest man in the group, a seasoned federal commander. Local police officers tried to intercept my approach. I ignored them. I pulled my military identification from my pocket and held it high, bypassing the secondary perimeter and stepping directly into the federal command circle. "I am Major Sienna of the United States Army," I announced over the chaotic radio chatter. I am the legal owner of the property currently under siege. The man holding the hostage inside is my husband Marcus. The hostage is his pregnant sister-in-law Cassidy. Call off your negotiators immediately. He is not having a domestic dispute. He is the primary financial mule for a transnational money laundering syndicate. The FBI commander narrowed his eyes, motioning for the local officers to stand down. Major, this is a highly volatile tactical situation. Unless you have actionable intelligence regarding the structural layout of the house, you need to step back. I have something vastly more important than floor plans, I stated firmly. I reached into my pocket and retrieved the encrypted black USB drive Maria had smuggled out of my home. I placed the small device directly into the hand of the federal commander. That drive contains the complete decrypted clone of my husband's primary network server. It holds the definitive proof of massive offshore accounts, illegal weapons manufacturing ledgers, and the direct financial pipeline funneling dirty cash through a local church charity. The commander stared at the flash drive, his expression shifting from irritation to intense professional interest. Furthermore, I continued maintaining absolute eye contact. It contains the digital footprint proving that Cassidy and her billionaire father fabricated the anonymous Department of Defense dossier, accusing me of high treason. They used my military career as a convenient smokescreen to cover up their own collapsing criminal enterprise. Connect that drive to your secure field terminal right now. The commander did not hesitate. He handed the drive to a tactical cyber analyst sitting inside the mobile command unit. For 3 agonizing minutes, the only sound was the rapid typing of the analyst and the blaring sirens echoing down the suburban street. Finally, the analyst looked up, his face pale with shock. He nodded sharply to the commander, confirming that the files were authentic, staggering in scope, and entirely devastating to the criminal syndicate. "The data is verified," the commander said, his voice dropping into a lethal, commanding tone. He grabbed his primary radio. "Alpha Team, this is Command. Negotiations are terminated. The suspect is a flight risk with confirmed ties to international organized crime. You are cleared for immediate dynamic entry. Execute breach." The response was instantaneous. A deafening explosion rocked the quiet suburban neighborhood as the SWAT team blew the hinges off my reinforced front door. 2 brilliant flashbang grenades detonated inside the foyer, lighting up the shattered bay windows with a blinding white intensity. Heavily armored operators swarmed into the residence from multiple entry points. Over the tactical radio channel broadcasting from the command vehicle, I heard the rapid, precise shouts of the entry team securing the perimeter. "Subject is disarmed, suspect in custody, hostage secured." I watched from the command post as 2 massive SWAT officers dragged Marcus out through the ruined front entrance. He was coughing violently from the chemical smoke, his hands zip-tied tightly behind his back. The arrogant corporate facade was permanently destroyed. He looked pathetic, weeping in terror as they slammed him against the side of an armored transport vehicle. Cassidy was escorted out moments later. She tried to play the fragile victim one last time, sobbing and reaching for the federal agents, but they ignored her tears. They had already seen the digital evidence. She was placed in handcuffs and shoved into a separate police cruiser. The FBI commander turned back to me, a profound respect settling into his hardened features. He picked up his radio again, switching to a secured federal encryption channel. "All field units, this is Command. We have secured the primary financial ledger. We have probable cause and immediate authorization. Initiate the raid on the luxury estate. Take down the billionaire target right now." Miles away, a massive convoy of federal tactical vehicles breached the iron gates of the family compound. The untouchable political giant who had attempted to destroy my military career was abruptly ripped from his comfortable mansion in handcuffs. His private lawyers were completely useless against the overwhelming digital proof Julian and I had recovered. The entire criminal syndicate was collapsing simultaneously in a highly coordinated tactical strike. I stood on the wet pavement watching the flashing lights illuminate the faces of Ruby and Elias. They stood near the yellow police barricade, watching in horror as their golden child was hauled away to face decades in a federal penitentiary. Their precious social standing was gone. Their stolen wealth was frozen. My long war was finally won. The flashing red and blue lights painted the suburban street in a chaotic mosaic of justice. I did not stay to watch the tactical transport vehicles haul my treacherous husband away into the dark night. I simply turned around and walked back toward the shattered front entrance of my home. The heavy steel security shutters I had dropped earlier that day were now bent and broken from the federal breach, but the structural integrity of my life was finally secure. By the time the sun rose the following morning, the absolute devastation of the criminal syndicate was completely unprecedented. The decrypted files Julian and I had handed over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation acted as a digital wrecking ball. The billionaire empire belonging to the father of Cassidy evaporated within a matter of hours. Federal agents simultaneously raided 6 of his luxury properties across the country. They seized his offshore banking accounts, impounded his private jets, and locked down his commercial shipping ports. The illegal weapons manufacturing and chemical export operations were exposed to international authorities, triggering a global manhunt for his remaining associates. Cassidy sat in a federal holding cell, completely stripped of her designer clothes and her arrogant privilege. She demanded her private lawyers, screaming that her wealthy family would destroy the prosecutors. She did not realize her father was currently occupying a cell right down the hall from her. Their generational wealth, the absolute shield she had weaponized against me in the bank lobby, was entirely confiscated by the United States government. She was no longer a powerful heiress. She was just another desperate criminal facing decades of mandatory minimum sentencing. The destruction of my in-laws was far more localized but infinitely more humiliating. Ruby and Elias had spent decades meticulously crafting a pristine, unassailable image of moral superiority within our community. They used their prominent church as a shield, lecturing others on piety, while actively washing cartel money through the donation plates. The moment the federal indictment was unsealed, their righteous facade violently imploded. Agents from the Internal Revenue Service marched directly into the church administrative offices on a Sunday morning. They carried heavy cardboard boxes out the front doors, seizing every financial ledger, computer hard drive, and donation record. The details of their massive charity fraud were immediately leaked to the local press. The community reaction was swift and merciless. The very congregation they had exploited for years turned against them with absolute fury. Deacons demanded their immediate resignation. Lifelong friends blocked their phone numbers. The city council revoked their charitable standing. Ruby and Elias were publicly humiliated, their faces broadcast across every major news network, as disgraced embezzlers who stole from their own people to fund a criminal lifestyle. Their bank accounts were frozen pending the federal audit, leaving them completely destitute overnight. Stripped of their stolen wealth and thoroughly exiled from their community, Ruby and Elias had nowhere left to hide. In a display of sheer delusional desperation, they attempted to return to my property. They arrived 2 days after the raid, pulling up to the curb in a battered taxi because their luxury vehicles had been impounded. I watched them through the newly repaired security cameras. Ruby looked haggard, her posture slumping under the weight of her profound public disgrace. Elias walked with a frantic, nervous energy, tightly gripping a folder of useless legal documents. They marched up my driveway, genuinely believing they could manipulate their way back into my home. They intended to claim squatters' rights, arguing that because they had temporarily resided in the house while attempting to steal my trust fund, they were legally entitled to occupy the premises until a formal eviction notice was served. They wanted to use my property as a fortress to hide from the angry journalists and furious church members actively hunting them down. They thought family privilege would somehow override the federal crimes they had committed. They reached the front porch, but they never made it to the door. 2 heavily armed military police officers coordinated through my base command to ensure my safety during the ongoing federal investigation, stepped out from the shadows of the restored wraparound porch. They crossed their arms, physically blocking the entrance. Ruby gasped, stumbling backward into Elias. She looked past the officers and saw exactly what I had left for them. Resting on the edge of the wet pavement, stacked haphazardly next to the garbage bins, were 10 heavy-duty black trash bags. I had personally packed every single item they had brought into my home. Their expensive clothes, their designer shoes, and their ridiculous luxury accessories were stuffed into the plastic sacks like common refuse. I stepped out onto the porch, standing tall behind the military police. I did not wear a dress or a tactical uniform. I wore simple civilian clothes radiating absolute unbreakable peace. "You have no legal right to be on this property," I stated, my voice carrying clearly across the manicured lawn. "Your belongings are on the curb. If you attempt to cross this property line, these officers will arrest you for criminal trespassing." Ruby stared at the trash bags, bursting into pathetic, genuine tears, as the reality of her total ruin finally crushed her spirit. Elias slowly dropped his completely useless legal folder onto the damp grass. The papers spilled out, blowing far away in the harsh afternoon wind. He reached out desperately, grabbing his wife by her shoulders, pulling her away from the armed guards. They slowly walked toward the heap of black plastic bags. The powerful, affluent church leaders were now just two broken criminals dragging garbage bags down a suburban sidewalk. I watched them call another taxi, struggling to load their ruined belongings into the cramped trunk. They had tried to steal my grandfather's legacy and destroy my military career for their own greed. Now they were driving off into complete oblivion, leaving me fully victorious. The house of cards had now completely crumbled to dust.